when the internet reared its ugly head. The world was shifting, and I decided to ride the wave a little bit. It's fun. And obviously, you can imagine it's just too much fun for me to retire. So what the hell? I keep doing it. I have this belief since I was a kid that you can't have much more than a 2-year horizon. And so far, my doctors say I'm going to live at least 2 more years. I figure, what the hell? I'm going to do it. Today, with AI, I think because of employers' concerns about risk, safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the candidates in many instances are ahead of the employers in terms of their ability to instantly change their resume to reflect the job description that you had done by AI as well. Bad data doesn't usually translate into good outcomes.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Gerry. Gerry, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Well, it's great to have you here, and you're joining us from New York, is that right?
I am about 25 miles east of New York City on Long Island, North Shore, so I can see Connecticut from here, not Russia.
And this is where you've grown up, like you've lived a lot of your life here as well?
Well, yes and no. My family basically is in Huntington, and I'm talking about 100 people. But I was an Army brat, so I traveled with my father literally all over the world as a young person, and then we settled back into Huntington. I've been 40 years in New Jersey, which is 80 miles away. And my daughter just got a little irritated driving 80 miles to check on me. And my wife. So I moved back 2 years ago to Huntington, and I live on a block with 8 other homes owned by cousins, my daughter, or my cousin's children. So my biggest problem any night is, where do I have cocktails?
Living the dream, hey?
Yeah, it is. At this point, without a doubt.
That's excellent. Well, it's something for me to aspire to one day. I don't know, Sydney Australian equivalent of that would be great.
Without a doubt. I've been to Sydney, I guess 3 or 4 times now. And I think it's one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been in. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think I'm lucky. It's beautiful. The weather's normally pretty good. You got the beach, you got the mountains, you got the harbour. People are reasonably friendly. It's quite an outdoor kind of culture. You get up, you go for a walk with your dog, you go get a coffee, run on the beach. It's that kind of vibe. A lot of sports outside.
I was in a hotel room, I think the first time I came, on a bluff, I guess, overlooking one part of the harbor on a Friday, I think. And I heard this enormous murmur going on, and I walked over to an open window and looked down, and the harbor was just filled with people just enjoying an evening on a Friday, just walking about. And I thought that was so cool. It was really great. And you could just hear the city talking. It's great.
Yeah, it's a great spot. Any plans to visit? I know it's a long way from where you are.
Long way. In the past, I would I would be fine on an economy flight, but if I come out this time, it's going to be a little more comfortable.
Good plan. Yeah. Now, I would love to hear more about Career Crossroads. How did it all begin? What are you guys all about?
Well, the origin story would take a long time, so I'm gonna cut that down a little bit. But I've been involved in recruiting for well over 50 years, in one way or another, and obviously wouldn't be talking about most of that 50 years in the sense that it was relatively primitive, but fascinating as well from a learning point of view. But somewhere in the And I've worked for a variety of folks, executive search. I worked for Johnson & Johnson for more than a decade. and a couple other, major corporations as well. And then for the last 30 years, in my company, which is Crossroads, and it really evolved out of when the internet reared its ugly head, if you will. The world was shifting, and I decided, ride the wave a little bit. Started writing a little bit about how recruiting might evolve from the 90s. I wrote about 8 books along the way, and but then really wanted to get my hands engaged in a variety of different ways. And somewhere around 2000, 2001, 2002 is the current model that we use, which is community. I've been always fascinated, maybe a little obsessed with how people collaborate with one another and what kinds of values we need to share in common in order to do that. And we were finding in the early 2000s, as the internet was really making its impact in recruiting, that a lot of folks would go to a conference but would not really speak truthfully about what they were doing with the web, in part because their legal and their PR people were saying, you really can't, because we don't want to put ourselves at risk. We don't want to share things that we think might be proprietary and so on. We thought that was a lot of BS. So we started thinking about how could we bring people together in a safe way, a trusted way, where they could talk a little bit about what they're doing right now, and share. And so there were 4 things that we wanted to make sure people had. One is that they were passionate about recruiting, that they were compelled to improve, that they had critical thinking skills to challenge one another, and that they were willing to share unconditionally. And those 4 characteristics we still use and probably turn down membership. So we're a membership community, and we do about 100 meetings a year with about 120 companies. Most of them are virtual, but about 5 or 6 are day-and-a-half meetings at the corporate headquarters of one of the hosts, being a member. And so we've had the luxury of meeting in places like vineyards owned by Gallo, buildings or campuses owned by Nike, in a variety of different kinds of things like that. So it's fun. And obviously, you can imagine it's just too much fun for me to retire. So what the hell? I keep doing it.
Yeah, and no plans to retire anytime soon, by the sounds of it.
No, I have this belief since I was a kid that you can't have much more than a 2-year horizon. And so far, my doctors say I'm going to live at least 2 more years. And so I figure, what the hell, I'm going to do it. And my wife gets a break every once in a while, when I travel off somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're onto something there. What I'm interested in now that I think about it is you have such an interesting cross-sectional time frame where you've seen such significant technological changes and other changes over that period. So my mind's now suddenly racing in a few different directions. One is there anything that is as true now as it was when you started in recruiting? Any almost like ground fundamental truths, I don't know, about people or about the way it should be done that it's never going to change, doesn't matter how it's done?
Yeah, I think recruiting is fundamentally based on the assumption of an infinite supply from the employer's point of view. And it's a faulty rule, if you will, that is very, very hard to overcome. The issue is, for example, we I think believe for pretty much the entire time going back to the Industrial Revolution before me, sometime before me, let's say about 1900, and is actually documented in a book called Principles of Scientific Management, which was written in 1912. And I'm a bit of a history buff relative to recruiting. So fundamentally we want people to line up. We want to have some mechanism to assess them. So we line them up and then do whatever we do. We pick the one that we want to hire, and then we tell all the rest doesn't go away. And today we're doing the same thing. We think we still maintain some information about those folks that go away, but we haven't treated them in a way that they might want to come back. So we're stuck with what we have to do. We really fail in some ways, I'd say 80% of the time to 90% of the time, in basic standards that I think are critical to us calling ourselves a profession. So, for example, if somebody does not go forward, but we never tell them that they're not going forward, we just leave them sitting by their landline phone, or today their mobile phone, waiting for that text that says, we're excited, you're competitive, and we would like to talk to you a little bit more. We don't do that in 80 to 90% of the time. And I would tell you that when I worked for Johnson & Johnson, I could describe, the mechanism by which, resumes came in envelopes that had to be opened and stacked and all of those kinds of things. But literally every day, as we dispense with those folks we were not going to go forward with, we had people in our talent acquisition office that sent out postcards or letters indicating the status and or the closure of our jobs. Now that our numbers were different than they are today, we were dealing with tens of thousands instead of hundreds of thousands of, resumes. But still, some companies have, as part of their process flow, the treatment or the consideration of different stakeholders. And fundamentally, recruiting has never built standards that said, if you're doing these things, you're recruiting. If you're not doing these things, you're not recruiting. So that's the reality is we're still, if you talk to many companies, you're still at 45 to 60 days to fill a job on average. And I know there's no real average, but the fact is, time to fill and a few other measures haven't changed a hell of a lot in 50 years. So we're not gaining some of the productivity that technology should have gotten for us. I think we're starting to, honestly. I do think we're at the cusp of doing that. But we still have to make a committed effort to think about, what are the needs of each of the stakeholders in the process, and then fully commit to creating a balance of that in terms of our workflow.
I guess if almost everyone in the market is doing it in a certain way, and the way they're doing it is maybe sort of the cheapest way for them to do it, that is maybe not the best thing for the 99% of the applicants who don't get the job, and that's just kind of normal. It's almost like a societal problem in a sense. Like, it's that big that how would you break through? Is it sort of a certain set of companies start doing it another way? It's like, oh wow, now there's the expectation that something's a little bit better, or is it going to be AI that just makes it so effortless to give the feedback that that's the way there could be breakthrough? What do you reckon?
I think, again, in that context of where we've been and where we're going, the shift, really, the pivot that's taken place slowly, but since the internet, is shifting the power towards the candidate, simply from a point of view of access to real information and equal kinds of capabilities. I think with the advent of the internet in the 90s through probably about 2004 or 5 until we saw the social media piece, I think employers were well ahead of the candidates themselves in the sense that they had access to the technology, but it was really harder for the candidates to access technology. So you had the growth of ATSs, for example, in employer after employer, while candidates were still sending their resume in an envelope. And then the companies had to open those envelopes, stack all those resumes, and most of them would overnight them to a service that would scan them and then fix all the errors that were caused by the poor scanning capabilities, and then put them on a disk and send it back to the employer, who now uploaded into Personic or Resumix or ResTrack. A week would go by. A week would go by just for that. So the employers were, dealing with all this technology, but it was killing the candidates in terms of just access, etc. Today, with AI, I think, because of employers' concerns about risk, safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the candidates, in many instances, are ahead of the employers in terms of their ability to instantly change their resume to reflect the job description that you had done by AI as well. And now we have this round robin kind of thing going on where the 200 people who apply look a lot alike in many respects. And now we have folks who are going, oh, well, yeah, but we know how to infer from bad data who is better than someone else. And I'm going, I don't know. That's not a rule I learned when I was studying engineering. Bad data doesn't usually translate into good outcomes. So I'm fascinated by that whole piece, and I think we're kind of at the entry point where we need a different method for collecting the data that surrounds those people who express interest in the job. And I'm starting to see a few vendors and suppliers looking at how they can deal with top of the funnel of folks who've expressed interest, ignore the application, and then use AI and or avatars and or some other method, if you will, to screen and interview the 200 people who expressed interest by collecting data more consistently that can be better organized for humans.
I sometimes think of recruitment as like a matching problem, where you've got on one side the job, the company, the role, the XYZ data points, and on the other side you've got the candidate. And that a big issue in hiring is that, especially in the early stages, you just don't have much data on either side, or the data is of low quality. You've got a candidate with a resume that they've written themselves, which is already kind of biased. It's like, hey, I'm amazing, believe me, please. And now they've used ChatGPT to optimize it, and then the companies come out with some generic JD that now again is being written by ChatGPT.
Yeah, I think you're right on target. I think that there's two things for me. The whole greeting issue on both sides is really our marketing of putting our best foot forward, attempting to put our best foot forward and engage the start of a conversation. And I think we often think that the embedded in that is data, is a lot of data that we can use without anything else. And I'm not 100% sure. Some companies are very intent on being totally truthful, and some people are totally bent on being totally truthful, but we really don't know which ones are which in relation to that. So I think the greeting has to focus more on decision making from that point of meeting, if you will, that there's two parties, the employer and the candidate, and now we have two decisions. So I believe we should be thinking more about what is the decision flow of that decision process. What kind of data, what kind of transparency am I going to need from the candidate to make sure that I can determine that they can do the job? And then for those who can do the job, there's a decision that they should be making with our help and with our transparency that helps them decide that they will be willing to do the job all full out under the conditions of that company. So if the company's under a lot of stress and you're going to have to work 12 hours a day for an extended period of time so that we can get our product up and running, you may not want somebody who can do the job, but is very committed to spending time with young children that they want to coach at soccer or football or whatever it might be. Now, whose decision is that? We shouldn't be biased in the sense that we say, oh, you got young kids, so we're not going to hire you. We need to be able to provide the kind of information that allows them to make the best decision. Sometimes they haven't been coached to ask the right questions. It would be, for someone else, it might be, they'd love to ask, how many people that look like me have you hired in the last 5 years, and where are they now? And that's how I might want to determine whether I'm going to accept that job. The fact that I can do the job isn't sufficient. The fact is, I want to do the job only under conditions that perhaps I get help from my hiring manager to develop for another job, right? Or I'm mature and I love doing this stuff, but I don't like somebody looking over my shoulder. What is the leadership style of that that hiring manager? Who are the other members of the team? Because I want to socialize with them, etc. Those are things that we don't usually share as employers to the degree that we should. And employees or candidates often haven't had the experience of a coach or mentor who can help us think about what do we really want in this next job. And I think that's really where the future is.
Struck me as you were describing the problem there that, okay, so we've got these two sides of the equation. As you said, both of whom are kind of marketing themselves, are putting their best foot forward, but also with that asymmetry where a company gets hundreds or thousands of applicants for one role. Ultimately, they're going to hire one person out of that 100 or 1,000. Therefore, could you not say that maybe the onus, like the sort of first mover in being more truthful and open, should be the company, because they almost got less to lose? And at least in my experience, when I've done this, the more aggressively transparent we've been in our own hiring or hiring for companies, the candidates have been really delighted because they're like, oh, wow, you've already answered 99% of the questions I would have asked in that first interview anyway, because you've given me this information pack that's got like a day in the life of the role, who my manager is, the team metrics, the product we're working on, who our customers are, the share options, that everything is already there given to me at the application stage. shouldn't the companies be doing that? I know it's a lot of effort. Maybe that's the biggest thing. Just compiling all this data and answering all these questions is a lot of effort. But shouldn't they do that first, and then the candidates who come and match that level of transparency? What do you reckon?
I agree with you absolutely 100%. I think one of the issues that the candidate faces who's looking for a job, forget both the passive. Passive is a little bit different. But the more active folks who are looking for a job are experiencing such a wide range of how they're treated that they're pretty they're getting pretty I don't know, angry and upset about this whole process to begin with. They're not looking at recruiting as something that's an exciting adventure to go on, as you can imagine. So it would be great if we had, and I think we were close to it, if the if the person who's looking at a job is kind of greeted in a sense of, hi, Tim, I see that you're looking at this job and that you've looked at a couple of the pages that relate to the benefits and a couple other things. I just want to point out, there's a couple more things that from a due diligence point of view, you might want to take a look at. We're trying to provide more information these days. And by the way, if you do express interest, we're only asking 2 or 3 questions. We've got 122 people so far who have expressed interest in this particular job, and we're probably going to close it at 150. And the reason we're going to do that is because we historically know that we can hire a qualified person who will want to do this job if we have approximately 150. We're 99 and 9/10% sure. And I expect that to happen in the next 2 hours. So if you express interest within that 2 hours, I want to tell you that you're going to get up to bat. You're going to be allowed to interview. It's going to be with me, and I'm not human, but I can speak 22 different languages and sign language, by the way. And I'm happy to spend whatever amount of time you want over the next 96 hours at your convenience. So do your due diligence. I'll be asking every single person the same questions, but I also have the ability to probe, the answers that you give to make sure that I understand the outcomes. I'm looking for an objective way to collect data. Notice I said objective. To collect data so that when we organize the data of the 150 people that have expressed interest, my human peers will be able to make the best decision about who we should go forward with. And if we don't go forward with you, I promise at your convenience, if you want, I'll come back and talk to you about why not you and what you could do to be more competitive in the future, or what other jobs maybe you're competitive for now. I have obviously access to a lot of different kind of data that I've been trained on. So, take your time, but you got 2 hours. I mean, why not something like that? And how would you feel as a job seeker that I'm demonstrating that I'm doing the best I can to be fair? Because that I think is the key to candidate experience. Is the difference between positive and negative is really 5 or 6 different aspects of that journey. But one of the most crucial is the perception of fairness, that I'm treated the same way as others, and that I am competing to some degree. So there are other things that have to be done, but the fact of the matter is, we're now at a point where if we use the technology properly, I think we're very close to being able to demonstrate that we could create a professional approach to the recruiting journey that changes the perception of the candidates, so that they might think of us better as healthcare rather than politicians.
Yeah, you've painted a picture of a sunny utopia that I hope I can experience soon. Uh, but then I also think, to your earlier point, like candidates adopted AI very quickly. Straight off the bat, they were using ChatGPT to optimize a resume in November 2023, whenever the first version came out. But of all the companies I've spoken to, very few have implemented any AI in what I'd say is like the core decision making of hiring, because they're reluctant, they're worried about legislation, there's general reticence there. So what is holding it back at the moment? Is something going to change that suddenly en masse talent teams are saying, you know what, actually, this is a better way to do it. We are going to embrace it. Like, is there something that's going to change? Is it just a bit more time? Is it just general AI adoption in society? Once it becomes normalized to interview with an AI, then
It's adoption, and it takes a lot longer than we think, because we figure, well, geez, we got something that's working. Let's use it. But your boss goes, well, what are the risks? What happens if it goes rogue? um, is there a cost? And of course, the lawyer is going to say, oh yeah, I can calculate the cost. It's a lot. The moment you have a class action suit, and the U.S., of course, is very litigious. So that's a potential problem. That's one of the problems that's going on. The other is the time it takes for people to understand aspects of, let's say, AI that they should really learn. And you being involved in technology, it becomes natural. And I studied engineering. My first degree is a Bachelor of Engineering. So fundamentally, the number one thing I do is try to sit there until I understand what that is. And it's a pain in the ass when you go, well, I don't understand that formula. Where's that going? Kind of thing. A simple thing. What is the training source that the AI is using? Is it mine? Or is it mine and my competitors? Or is it beyond that? Whatever. And how big is that data? And do we have any standards by which we can assess the algorithms that the vendors are using to determine which might be better, faster, less, whatever? So we start looking at that, and people don't know how to ask the question, and very often don't understand what the answer means from a point of view of good or bad in determining whether the solution is high enough risk that we need to have more certification or more comfort relative to it. I put together this past year almost 100 people from the vendor community and from the talent acquisition community to agree on what questions should employers ask vendors who are making claims about AI. And so the result was about 28 questions. We tried to obviously simplify and make it clearer. So it went through several iterations and filters, and then published last month on our website a document for that could be downloaded and used by anyone for their RFI or RFP or parts of it that relate to this. There's a lot going on in our space. And fundamentally, I think the answers to some of this are what we could agree on, us collaborating across some of the boundaries, vendor, TA, practitioner, and on a global basis as well.
yeah, I think that's really important, because the technology is moving so quickly, which makes it difficult to keep up. But also, I imagine there's also some sharks in the water, or some people pushing stuff as AI that isn't really AI at all, or is just some other fluff. And so it must be almost impossible to tell from the sales deck what is real and what is not.
It is. I love that. It really is out there. And then there's a lot of folks that are opportunists. So they go, okay, you're a job seeker. Here's what I can do. I can morph a really smart person that you might know to look exactly like you on Zoom, so they can do the test. And then when you show up, you look like the person who did the test, because I've changed their look. In terms of that, you just have to use this application, as a front piece for whatever. So there's a lot of stuff going on that are probably inappropriate. And now, obviously, on the employer side, how do we test for cheating, right? And that a lot of employers are adopting tools that test whether or not the person that they're dealing with or talking with or interviewing is in fact the real person. I find this absolutely fascinating, and it's going to be in lockstep for a while too.
And not only that, I feel like the sort of, is it cheating, is almost becoming a philosophical question, because it's like, if you're hiring someone and you're saying, well, I really want you to be AI ready, I want you to be using ChatGPT and Claude every day on your job, but by the way, during the hiring process, don't use these at all, because that's cheating. This is a very mixed message to give. And so other companies have gone the other way and said, well, you know what, go for your life, use whatever tools you want. I will now evaluate your use of those tools. So they've almost gone a layer deep and said, well, I want to see how you're using the tool, as opposed to the ostrich strategy of putting your head in the sand and pretending like they're not using it.
Yeah, I've insisted with my members, Tim, that you need on your website to be very clear about two things. One is, what do you assume is proper use of AI by a candidate at various stages of them, looking at your jobs. And at the same time, if you're going to do that, you better be open and transparent about how you are using AI to make a fair a fair decision in relation to them, and overcome what misunderstandings they may have about your use of AI. So I think this kind of transparency is going to be essential, but I think we critique, if you will, the use of technology by candidates inappropriately as cheating in many instances. Now, if they're totally misrepresenting themselves intentionally, that's cheating. But if they're trying to put their damn best foot forward truthfully, and they're an introvert and they're not that fast in responding to a question, it helps them if an AI bug in their ear that knows all of their history reminds them of some story that's truthful, that would help respond to this particular kind of thing. I would love that. When you prepare for, as a kid or as a young professional, and you're preparing for interviews, you're trying to keep in mind all of the things that you've done, all the projects or the whatever. And somebody says, well, tell me about a project where you've done this, that, and the other thing. And it would be wonderful if it said, hey, the one that you did 2 years ago, J&J, when this was the outcome. Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me tell them that story. So that would be kind of cool and okay. And that to me is a wonderful use of AI. A quick story. My grandson is 16 years old. I've been talking to for a couple of years about how you're using AI. and he was getting his hand slapped because he was going to AI, and the high school was basically saying you can't use it. And he was asking for answers, and he got the answers, and then the teacher would go, "So how did you get to that answer?" No. So I go, recently, he says, well, I've learned. He said, I do, ask for the answer, but then I ask for the explanation of how to get to the answer from this point. And he says, I'm learning better than I did in class because AI is really a good, clear teacher. And anything I ask, it's patient in telling me the answer to it immediately. It's, instant. He said, the other thing I'm doing, though, is 2 of my classes, my grade is 60% class participation. So I show ChatGPT what the teacher did today and then ask it to infer what the teacher's going to teach tomorrow and what questions I might ask as a 16-year-old that would make me look good. And I'm going, the kid is learning how to prompt about the future and is learning in advance, as opposed to I just read, 2 chapters. I'm verbally having a conversation about those chapters with ChatGPT, and I can scan text faster than I can read a chapter. And ChatGPT is consuming, all of these books, if you will, and helping me to understand the linkages, day by day. And it speeds up my learning. I find that fascinating. And I can only imagine when he gets through the rest of, he's got 2 more years in high school and then 4 years in college, perhaps. What do you think he's going to be doing when he comes out of that and is looking for a job, or telling the company this is the job he'll do? I find that fascinating. And I think that's going to drive organizational change more than anything else.
It's a great example of, not just focusing on like the first order effects of the technology.
Yeah.
And saying, oh, well, it can now answer all the questions, therefore any student's just going to copy and paste and then learn nothing, which maybe is the case for some students, but
without a doubt, some students will do that. But that's we always have a diversity in our thinking about stuff like that. But the kids that know how to harness this stuff will be amazing.
Is it fair to say then, do you view it as like a leverage tool where you're going to multiply 0 by 100, it's still 0, but if you've got a base skill of 20 multiplied by 100, you've got a lot?
Yeah, I'm curious if we start showing some real productivity gains on the recruiting side. I have trouble trying to imagine the gestalt of the whole, how the whole world shifts. So I tend to stay very, very focused in my own spot where I'm fascinated by the past, present, and future of recruiting itself. And I think that's about as far as I can imagine.
You mentioned previously about candidates and the need for them to kind of feel like it's been a fair process. They kind of understood how they've been evaluated. And I know from our experience in running Aluba, anytime we've had the results switched on, where we've shown the candidate their score, a breakdown per skill, a breakdown per topic, recommendations on how to improve, their perception of the experience is always higher, and their complaints about unfairness dropped to almost 0. It was when we would have it just the, hey, thanks for taking a test, and then didn't really know that, I guess, the question bells start to go off in their head. And I think for our scoring mechanism, it's very obvious. Like they get a score out of 100%. They can kind of see how they've been scored. They got the answer right. They got the answer wrong. It's kind of simple. I wonder if it'll be a bit harder with some of these more nuanced, let's say an AI interviewer, where it's more of a free form conversation. The scoring rubric isn't like right, wrong. It's going to be a little bit more gray. I imagine part of the challenge will be conveying what is still quite a complex score into something simple for the candidates to still trust and believe in it. Because at the moment, I feel like the median candidate would distrust AI would be the starting place and trust a human. I wouldn't. I'd probably put it the other way around. But I feel like we're starting from a place of quite strong negativity around AI and its fairness. Is there a lot to overcome there, do you think?
I think there is, but I think it's easily dealt with by being as fully transparent as you just described. So, I mean, so in relation to, and I'll do it two ways. One, in relation to the collection of data. So let's say this interview is not about making an assessment. It's about the collection of the right amount of data that's relevant to the job that can be used to reflect, if you will, on those people who can do the job. Not the best, but the people who can do the job. And so there's some things we need to know, some of which are easily described. But in an interview, you can basically be asking about an experience, if you will, and the depth of that experience in relation to something that's relevant to the job. There may be conversations that include side issues that are not relevant, but the AI's summary should be only those things that are relevant to what it is we need to know in order to go further in the job. So that's one thing, and there's no reason why you can't share that with the candidate itself to confirm, that these are all the things that are relevant from our perspective. And am I missing anything? Is there something that you have done that you think is relevant to your competitive value for this job that we haven't discussed? And then include that. The second thing that happens in this, quote, fairness interview is if there is something specific, an assessment that's more detailed, something that Aluba has, something that, DDI has, something that whatever. So the point is, whatever assessments I'm using that help augment my decision process, I should be able to describe, defend, and also promise feedback in relation to it. I don't believe anybody, and I feel very strongly about this, and I've always been a nut about this, that I'm never going to take a test that only you get to see. If I'm giving you data that has something to do with how I'm perceived by someone else, I want that. I don't care if it's raw data. I don't care if it's whatever. But I think any modern assessment should be defended for its value, its face validity, if you will, to the candidate. Most PhDs get really into, concurrent and predictive validation issues. They're important for the employer. But for the candidate, face validity is key. And when you share data to the candidate, as you described, that candidate is giving you feedback, that they see the connection between the problem or the questions or the assessment that you've given and the job as described that they've learned. And if not, you're hearing their feedback immediately so that you can adjust and evolve your assessment to be more face valid. It's the simplest form of validity, but I think it's critical for that candidate, for that stakeholder. And I think if we were to do those things, I do think we have a whole different perception on the part of candidates relative to this process. And I would never take on an employer if we had that as a standard. By the way, then you wouldn't take on an employer who is unwilling to share the data from the assessment with the candidate.
Well, I hope we can move in this direction.
Yeah, that's the world I want to live in, Tim.
Yeah. I think there's just such a great opportunity with AI to make improvements all over the place. Of course, it comes with a lot of potential downsides as well, but I think there's a lot of upside. So let's embrace it and give it a shot.
Yeah, I think you're in a great spot. I do. I think other countries like Australia have been much more progressive in developing modern approaches to assessment than the United States. We've been much more impacted, if you will, by PR and law in terms of risk mitigation rather than the positive side of how we could do a better job in making decisions.
Gerry, just one final question. If you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
It would be about their satisfaction with the process by the stakeholders. For me, those are the questions that I tend to ask anyone from their perspective. So if I'm talking to vendors, it's one thing. If I'm talking to candidates, it's another. I've obviously been obsessed more with the candidate only and their perception and actions. So, do they act on that perception? Do they go to Glassdoor and write something? Do they stop buying the products or using the services of the employer that never got back to them? I mean, what are the risk rewards in relation to how candidates, how recruiters who are using bad tools, how long do they stay? Is there a tenure issue there? How about the hiring manager? How about the employer? How is it used and misused? And so I'm fascinated by how stakeholders themselves are served, if you will, within the hiring process. That's important to me.
Wonderful. Well, I will level that question at our next guest sometime next week, and I'll let you know what they said. Gerry, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.